Welcome back to the Train the Trainer podcast. This is definitely a different day. We're just wearing the same clothes.
If you go look at some of the other episodes, you can see on what days they were recorded. Not to tattle on ourselves, but sometimes we're not as consistent as we would like to.
You know what? How long has it been? Like 6, 7, 8 months? Yeah. It was a rough year, but that means we're doing big things. You have hard years, you're doing big things.
This is truly a passion project for us and something that I feel like we've missed out on not doing more often. And that's something that is definitely one of my goals moving into 2025. If you watch that goal setting episode,
I'm having a lot of fun.
Is being more consistent on this, because consistency is the key to everything in this business, and we're not embodying that super well.
No, I bet we enjoy our careers more if we do this more. Which brings us to our topic, employee stick today.
Yep.
Nobody knows what I'm talking about. So what we're going to talk about today, guys, we're going to go kind of twofold. So we'll start probably on the training side. So if you're a trainer listening to this, you'll enjoy the first part. And then the second half, we're going to kind of move into management side. But we want to talk about creating stick or fostering an environment for stick. And so what I mean by that, if you're a trainer, it's going to mean how do I get my clients to stick? How do I keep retention high, et cetera, outside of just like the logical stuff about like measuring progress, which we're going to speak on that too, but also just the environment and the energy and the excitement and the conversations. And then in addition to that, we're going to talk about management stick. So when it comes to, if you have a PT staff or one of our fitness managers in the company, how do you create an environment where your trainers want to stay there and stay a part of your program? So I think on the training side, this will be quick. It should be kind of easy, right, Andy? As far as like creating retention, what are like your big, 3 or your big 5, your main things you like to focus on to keep clients engaged in the program?
Okay. Just overarchingly on this topic, why I love it so much is it's hard to beat a team that doesn't lose. And it's hard to beat a trainer that doesn't lose. You can be terrible at client acquisition and new business, but you will thrive in this business if you play great defense, if you never lose a client. There's a reason why they say defense wins championships. I've seen a lot of people in this career that are great at sales, and then they burn out very, very quickly because they realize, oh, shoot, I now have to keep this person. So I think that this value of there's so much value in this topic. If we're looking at our own professional development, I think that is something that sometimes people sleep on. So I love that we're talking about it today. So where do I start with a trainer? Is first what we call our permission to play values, which is like, do you show up looking like a professional? Are you wearing your uniform to where you look like your value exceeds whatever the client is paying you as far as that transaction for that session, right? Hopefully it's not resorted to that, but that's a fast way to make it transactional when you look like crap or you look like you're not prepared physically, mentally.
Looking good is one part, but you also have to show up in the first place. You got to show up on time, which should go unsaid, but I was
insinuated with showing up as a professional, but sure. Yeah. So you have to show up ahead of time where you're looking expectant for that client coming in. You're prepared for that session. You're not completely winging it on the fly, right? Or even worse, asking the client, well, hey, what do you want to work on today? Hate that. One of my biggest FM pet peeves. Again, looking great in uniform, like a professional. Staying attentive to your client throughout the entire session, engaged body language, and then like avoiding distractions. So one of our permission to play values is like no cell phones, like where it's obvious that you're not like answering text messages or scrolling through social media through the session. So that's always where I start, because candidly, as I've elevated, I had always heard this and I didn't learn it to be true, I feel like, until I was actually in position where I was seeing a lot of like client cancellation, feedback forms and whatnot. And most of it was because a trainer violating those permission to play values. Well, my trainer's always late.
Those are dramatically more important than what the session delivery is.
It's like 80% of cancellations are permission to play violations, so to speak, where the trainer is late, they're moving the session around all the time. It's not that the trainer can't deliver them results, it's that they're not preparing ahead of time for the sessions to deliver a great experience.
And that's more important than your squat form, your biomechanics, your programming principles. It's just, I think those permission to play values are super underrated. I think we've both seen an incredibly talented trainer, I would say. I'd probably say he's more talented than you might. I'm going to give him more credit. But I mean, a very, very smart guy as far as being a trainer, but not following those permission to play values where they're missing appointments or they're inconsistent, they're late. I mean, every single day. And
100%.
eventually you burn out of the career.
You can lead somebody through the most beautifully, like, the most amazing, like, tactician led type session, but it doesn't matter if you only have that person do one workout a month.
And not to mention, like, if you're showing up late and if you're breaking, I think, these permission to play values, you're devaluing your career so much that you'll hate it.
Oh,
you're going to feel like a loser. And to a degree, I'm not going to lie, you kind of are if you can't show up. But I think, trainers who, we have a thing at our club, like, where I don't like when trainers wear chains. Trainers always want to wear chains. I think why are you wearing a chain? Like, if your doctor was wearing a chain, would you let him, like, do heart surgery on you? No. Right?
Sure.
And I still have trainers who wear chains, but it goes with, like, nose rings or, even like the clothes you wear when it comes down to your shoes or your shorts or your shirt. And, I tuck my shirt in a lot of the time too, just because when I'm treating myself and my career as a professional, I feel dramatically better.
Yep. I feel like this is something that we're chatting out and we're answering, but this is a question I would always ask trainers often, right? If you are going to act as if, servicing your client was the highest priority to where they wouldn't leave, right? What would showing up for that session look like, and what would that experience look like? And for most of them, that includes things like tucking your shirt in, not wearing a chain, taking any facial piercings out, like not wearing a hat, looking like you took a shower and you were preparing your best for that individual. Having a workout prepared ahead of time, ideally on a clipboard or something physical, or if it is on your phone or your tablet, like to where it's really engaged with them and it's not something that only you're viewing, to where an outsider, they wouldn't know what you're doing on your phone.
I would be willing to bet you are going to lose almost no clients from true churn. And by true churn, I mean they quit just because they want to quit. Like, if somebody's moving out of town, there's not a lot you can always do about that. Mm-hmm. But I think if you're following those on every single session consistently, it's very, very hard to lose a client. I mean, I am obsessed with the stats on how bad people need personal trainers. I think it's like 67% of members don't use their gym membership. And then 30% of that remaining, 33% that are in the gym, 30% of those interact with a trainer or an instructor. So that means you have a 3% chance, if you have a membership, of just using it on your own. So if you want to create stick as a trainer for your clients, literally just showing up and being that, spot of consistency for them that they get to see constantly, they're not going to leave the program. They leave the program when they're essentially being disrespected.
For sure. I'd say that's 80% of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's for keeping a client, let's say, to a year, maybe beyond even as well. I think there might be some other things like that other 20% to keep somebody longer term than that. But that would cut down on so many of the issues.
Yeah, and with the stats I just gave you, I think that indicates that the trainer-client relationship is a need. It's not a want, and I think that's important. That we know that as trainers, is that at the end of the day, even if let's say I get a client, right, and they come join me, and it's they have a back problem, and so the whole goal is that we fix their back pain, we get them to where they can move at a great capacity with no pain anymore, etc. So you have that need portion of that training, and let's say that lasts 3 months or 6 months. When we've surpassed that quote unquote need in relation to the back pain, there's still a need present, and that need is going to be the fact that we know they're not going to come in unless they're interacting with the trainer. And there's even going to be cases sometimes where maybe that's not necessarily a need, and they do work out on their own pretty consistently. But now they work with you because they desire to work out with you. And I think if you're going to have that desire spectrum of like, oh, you work with me because you want to, not because you need to or you have to, it comes down to, that sort of thing as far as like, are you showing up on time, uniform, programming, if you're making programs, are you delivering their programs on time? Just the professionalism aspect is what keeps them on the desire portion. I do think there's something to say, though, about your topic of conversation in your session. Andy, I think you speak great about this. So in your opinion, like if I want to keep a client with me super long term, or you could talk about reverse charisma, which Chris just talked about. What does that look like if I want to keep a client with me on the desire portion of things?
I want to answer that, but I want to click the save button on what you said real quick. So if someone needs a personal trainer, which I guess one could argue that anybody needs a personal trainer, but there's definitely a spectrum where people need it to the point where they may not need it as much anymore. They're
Mhm.
consistent on their own, where they're going to want a trainer. But if they're in that need portion, I mean, those permission to play values are how you keep a client,
Mhm.
right? It's not going to be what we're going to talk about next, that inverse charisma, aligning interests, things like that. But like if someone's in that need personal training phase, like just act as a professional, right?
Mhm.
Those things that we listed as far as permission to play values, and you'll keep people. Okay. Now, once you transition someone to where they no longer need your services, right? You want to get them to the point where they stick with you for forever, right? And this was always like, I remember we even had like a little bit of a disagreement on early in our time together. I had like the same clients when you came on. At that point, I was in the club that we were at together for 5 years, and I hadn't had a single client fall off my roster at that point. I had the same people for 5 years. It's like, how can you train the same people for 5 years? Doesn't that mean you suck as a trainer? Maybe. But my argument was that those people may not need me anymore, but they wanted to stick with me because I made it my mission to be the best hours of their week, however many hours I had the opportunity to be in their life. And I made that hour about them where we could talk about whatever interested them. Very little of our conversations were centered around fitness. It was mostly me asking questions about the things that they found valuable, making them just feel awesome for that hour and talk about themselves. So if they're a business mogul, talk about their business, ask them a bunch of questions, just make them feel really good. If they're a grandma or great grandmother, talk about their grandkids, make sure you know all of their names, their interests, where they go to school, etc. Just being interested. Interested to the point where they feel interesting. And if they feel interesting, they're not going to leave, right? That's something that they become attached to. If they like talking about watches, right?
Mhm.
You can talk about watches. And some of you guys might know who Gunnar Peterson is, a famous trainer. He's like, I know a lot about Rolex because it gives me and my clients something to talk about. I know a lot about cars because it's something my clients and I can talk about.
Mhm.
I know about traveling to Europe or the Caribbean or wherever, because then I can have a shared interest with my client that's going to stick them, have them stick with me far beyond the point where they need my services, so to speak.
I think that's really good. And I think when I was first kind of like watching you, if you will, and analyzing Andy, especially when I first started, I was just like, dang, this Andy guy is incredible. He knows way too much stuff. He's giving me all these crazy quotes from all these crazy books. And in my head, I'm like, this is why his people still train with him. Because although he's not, still delivering value on the training portion, because, he is, but they have that portion down. I think, Andy, you deliver even more value to a lot of individuals with just some of the things and some of like the work you've done to educate yourself on things outside of the gym, where you can talk about management with them, or you can talk about life with them, or self-growth, or religion, etc. And I think Andy delivers a lot of value to them as well, where he's teaching them other things. And so that was a big thing for me, that I was like, okay, I need to know X amount about this topic so that I can teach my clients about it. And I think in doing that and chasing that, I learned that that's probably not the best way to go about it. In all honesty, me educating myself on those things just allowed me to ask better questions, so they felt even more interesting.
That's what I was going to add. So yeah, you might have all these resources, but you're definitely not like lecturing to your clients.
Yeah, so you don't want to. But at one point I almost got there, and we have a trainer at the club now who kind of does that, who is great as far as pursuing some self growth for themselves and like educating themselves. But they get to the point where, there's another trainer that did the same thing, but they almost like talk down to their clients to lecture to them.
Yeah,
and I don't think that's effective. So I think you're on track with like, yeah, educate yourself on these things, but it's not to teach them necessarily. Although I think some of that does happen for you. I think it's more about, again, having the ability to ask those questions that they know you understand something about what they want to talk about.
Mm-hmm. I had a client earlier this week, just to use a recent example, but he was talking about the most recent books that he had read on like spiritual apologetics. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I asked him like a few questions on it. He probably talked for like 20 minutes. I'm like, oh, by the way, did you read Jordan Peterson's new book, like We Who Wrestle with God? Like, it's been really cool. And then he got like super excited where he was asking me questions about it. And I would answer, but then I would ask him like, well, what do you think about that? Like, how does that relate to what you've been reading? And that was probably an hour's worth of conversation, or to the point where like he didn't want the session to end. He's like, well, what are you doing right now? I'm like, well, I'm going to my next session. He's like, shoot, I wanted to go out to breakfast and keep talking about that. Like, that person is never going to leave. This is someone who like is still probably on the need exercise spectrum, like hates exercise, and personal training is just like workout insurance, which is fine. But it takes something a little bit more to make it stick, because if I kept it about the fitness, then he definitely wouldn't stick. So we have to engage with other interests to keep him
that's such a big
so to
takeaway, though, and I think it's important as a trainer you hear this, especially because I'm thinking about my staff right now, and I have a really, really young staff, and they're always doing interesting things, and they want to talk about them. And I think it's okay sometimes to talk about yourself, but like Andy was talking about how he had already read this book, and maybe the client hadn't. Is that correct? The client hadn't read the book, and so the client wanted to know about your book, but consistently you ask them, "What do you think about this?" And this is a tactic I use, one, because as a trainer, like the smartest people around me a lot of times are my clients. I've gotten to that point where my clients are, I would say, dramatically further ahead of me than me in life, which most of them are way older, so hopefully I'll catch them. But a lot of times I am talking to them about a problem I'm facing, and I'm asking them a million questions on what they do, etc. And I think that says a lot, because it makes them feel interesting, right?
Yep.
And it's consistent. And then it also, have you guys ever like heard that thing where like if you want to make a friend, ask them for a pen? Have you ever heard that? Never heard that? So like there's a trick that if like you want somebody to be friends with you that's like in one of your classes in college and high school, etc., ask them to borrow a pencil. And because that person's delivering value to you, they'll then like you more, right? Or they'll want to be your friend.
Yep.
And I think that's a superpower if you're a young trainer or you're chasing some goal and you want to talk about it with a client. Asking them questions for their opinion not only makes them feel valued and important and interesting, but it also, again, just makes them like you a little bit more because they're giving you value.
Yep. I think that's a super valuable like reflection tool. And I know we're going to transition and talk about like leaders doing this with their followers or employees as well. But not putting the spotlight on you, but putting the spotlight on them, making whoever you're serving in that moment, again, whether it being a client or an employee, but making them feel interesting, making them feel empowered, making them feel valued. People don't want to leave those type of relationships. And I feel like that's that next level of stickiness, so to speak. Once you've got the permission to play stuff down, right? Then it's okay. And then it's the next level.
So it really works on like a paradigm, because like when you originally begin with a client and they're in that need phase, potentially depending on the need, right? If I'm working, with a client who just needs workout insurance, it might be different. You might get to that spectrum faster where you're letting them really dominate the conversation. But early, when you're training with somebody that has, a back pain or a specific problem you're wanting to solve, you might be talking quite a bit. You might spend most of the session communicating with them information, etc. And I think that rotates. And I think the quicker you can rotate it, the better, where you can get them to be speaking more than you during the session.
Yeah, it's probably to what degree? Because I think like if you can, because that person with back pain may also hate coming to the gym. So you need to make sure that you sprinkle in enough that makes them feel interesting and excited and like it's their best 3 hours of the week. It's to come in and spend an hour with Tiger, right? Because it's those 3 hours where they're getting taken care of as opposed to taking care of all their other BS that they might be responsible for. So I 100% agree with you. It's probably to what degree. If you had somebody that really needs something specific from you and you just spend the entire hour talking about apologetics or whatever it might be, their grandkids, right? And you never address their core issue, their physical pain that they might be in, that would be a recipe for disaster as well.
So I think, and you could almost blanket say this, I think as a trainer, if you're misunderstanding anything we're talking about and you want to just have like a blanket statement, how do I do a somewhat effective job of this? I think your goal should be to, over time, talk dramatically less during your session. You as a trainer. So like, let's say I'm fixing back pain, I have to talk a lot, but if I have educated my client effectively or I fixed their row form effectively, guess what? I have to coach them less. So my goal would be to talk less, right? And then it's the same thing when you're moving into that desire portion. Your goal should be to talk less and ask them questions to get them to talk more. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think as a general rule, that's valuable. I mean, you definitely don't want to be interrogating somebody and just asking really short, like
pointed questions. Yeah, don't do that.
Questions. Like you want to craft your questions in a way that it like truly makes you sound interested.
Mm-hmm.
And even that might just be even tonality too. Like I've done mock sessions with trainers before who talk very little and ask a lot of questions, but they're like one sentence, low tone, hunched over body language. Like that doesn't make me feel interested or empowered. That makes me feel like I'm being interrogated.
And then I'm bored. now I'm bored. Too.
Yeah.
So you do still have to add value to the conversation, which I think is good. Cool. Well, let's pivot then. So let's move on. I think we've kind of covered that. Let's move on to talking about, as a manager, how do I create stick for my employees?
Mm-hmm. I think the biggest one is vision, where they can see themselves aligning their personal vision with yours. I forget who originally like crafted this analogy, but like imagine like you have an umbrella, right? Keeping away the rain, where all your team wants to be under your umbrella, so to speak. I'm probably botching that analogy, but hopefully you can get the idea. Your vision needs to be so big that even a top producer who like really values their potential can see themselves like getting in the trenches with you as opposed to going off and doing their own thing. So I think vision is super important, because without it, I mean, you might have like a C or D player stick with you, but if you want to be able to have A and B players stick with you, you better have a big vision that is compelling for them, even above and beyond whatever their personal vision might be for themselves. And then 2 would be a consistent example, to where you're not just words, like your actions and your follow through align with your stated vision.
Interesting. So like, I think fleshing that out to give like some specifics, I think our relationship is a great example of kind of what you talked about there in the beginning, as far as getting somebody to stick long term. Andy did a phenomenal job, which I loved training when I started, so it kind of worked out well. But Andy definitely, I would say, inspired me to chase the potential impact I could have company wide. We were talking about this the other day, as far as like me wanting to win Trainer of the Year the second or third time or whatever, was like, hey, I want to break every record on the planet, but not so my income looks good, or so that really not even so much that I just impact my clients more. Like that's important to me, don't get me wrong, but it was more about creating impact company wide to inspire other trainers to do more and treat our job more as a career instead of a job. And that you fostered a lot of that energy into me. And that, I mean, that's interesting. It's hard to do though. I'll tell you something I struggle with. So like for me personally, like my greatest, I think, stick that I try to have is trying to make the environment fun, like in making the job exciting to come to, which there's something to be said for that, of course. But I don't know that it works as long-term, and I don't know that it works as much with top producers.
I would agree, because if you've ever read Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, those that had the deepest sense of meaning were the ones that ended up surviving through the Holocaust, and those that just seemed to have the most optimistic demeanor without that underlying deeper sense of purpose were the first ones that perished, that didn't make it. So I think that that's super important. Like you want to have a really engaging environment, but you also need to have that underlying like purpose as well.
Have you heard of the drive? I think they were in France that were driving the ambulances that came out of the psych ward. So it was, I can't remember exactly the name of what these guys are called, but I was reading about this like 6 months ago, and I was like, this is incredible. But it's about in France, they had they predicted with all the bombing runs that were coming through, I think it's in France, that they were going to see like a massive influx of admittance into like the psych ward from the bombing.
Interesting.
They thought they were going to see more patients. They thought their patients that were already there were going to get dramatically worse. They were super, super worried about this. And the opposite happened. And so they had dramatically less admittance. But then also some of the people that were already in the psych ward, they needed drivers really bad to drive ambulances to get these people that had gotten, hurt into like hospitals and care. And so they took some of them out and had them do this driving job. And it actually fixed a ton of problems for them. I mean, they were doing dramatically better emotionally. They didn't need to go back to the psych ward at the end when everything was finished. And I think what they concluded was that it came down to having that purpose or that drive to survive, because I have something that's so important that I must do it.
Yep.
And that, I mean, that's crazy and it's super cool. And I think some people naturally have that, of course. But the question is, how do you foster that in a top performer? Or, maybe they already have that like purpose-driven personality, but how do I not twist it, but how do I shift it to where it's, in this career or in this endeavor?
So with an individual, I think that has to be done through questions. I don't think that I could just tell somebody like, this is what your goal should be, or this is what your vision should be, or like what you want for yourself should be 100% aligned with what the company's vision is. I feel like that's crafted through questions like, what do you value? What does that look like in action? Candidly, I think the thing that's really important for Stick is when you help people envision more for themselves than they would have otherwise. So you make visible to them, or you ask them to explore a potential larger vision than they're currently entertaining, if that makes sense. I may have trailed off there a little bit.
That makes sense.
But, like if you have somebody that you might concerned as a flight risk, right? It might be that they're perceiving the grass is greener somewhere else, or they don't believe that a worthwhile future is possible for them or attainable for them.
I think we kind of spoke almost in this same field on our last podcast where we were talking about goal setting, but I think it does come down to that same thing where essentially if you're helping the person grow as an individual, but also grow like within their career or within their, I guess, aspirations, you're going to have that stick because they're going to be obsessed with the growth portion.
As long as someone's growing, they're not going to leave. They're not going to stop.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to get unfulfilled to the point where they're going to entertain something different.
Gosh, I need to figure out how to do a better job of that.
Helping helping each individual grow.
Yeah, or like even just aspire for more or know that they're consistently growing, especially high achievers who, the thing is with, you hire a trainer and they make dramatic success extremely quick. So then it becomes very hard. When a trainer's starting, I mean, it's super straightforward and simple. It's okay, we're going to grow your business. You're going to get more clients. You're going to make more money. It's simple.
It's the infinite game for both, right? So for like a super fast achiever, you need to make sure that you don't like lead them to believe that that's all that there is. Like the more you grow, the more you realize your capacity to grow and contribute even more. Or on the other end, how do you keep someone in the game is you need to like hang the carrot like 1 degree further. Like you did, let's say you added 5 clients last month. Well, why don't you believe that you could add 6 this month?
Mm-hmm. I think that's easier. I think it's easy for just driving the production portion. Which maybe some managers find that hard. So maybe we should speak on that more.
I think they do. So I think sometimes their limited vision like destroys their team. It's the law of the lid. Like they might be a level 5 leader and they're trying to they're trying to grow their department, so to speak, but they can't ever get any employee beyond that of a 5, right? Oh, you added 3 clients last month. That's good enough. And then the person adds 3 clients every month, loses 4 every month, and then they're gone in 6 months. So I think that happens probably more often. I know that's probably not something that
it's not a personal struggle of mine, but it is important we talk about it.
Yes.
For everybody else listening. And so I think that's good. Is just continuing to not necessarily move the bar, if you will. And we're not saying don't acknowledge their success. If they hit a goal, that's phenomenal. But continuing to elevate, I guess, the standard, if you will, once we're hitting the standard.
For sure.
Right. And I think you could probably speak to, a trainer, and you could probably have an open conversation with this about like, okay, well, and you do a great job with the question part as well. I was like, what are you capable of doing in the next 30 days? And so a trainer might, add that 3 clients like you talked about. Mm-hmm. And then when you move into that next month conversation, maybe it's a month later and, you recap, hey, great job. You added the 3 clients. What do you think you're capable of this month? And they say, oh, I think I can add 3 more. Then you could ask like a follow-up question like, well, do you feel like you've gotten any better in the last month? Yeah. Like, have you developed skill-wise to where you are better at closing or better at getting somebody to show up for that first appointment to where it's maybe you could do 4 this month or 5, or it could be not skill. It could be just like a character trait saying, well, like, did that feel hard last month? Oh, it didn't. Do you feel like you're capable of working even harder or pushing harder in order to grow your own business and grow yourself? that fair? That'd be like a fair way to do that?
No, I think that that's great. I feel like as an overarching caveat when it comes to like leading other people, but probably like the client retention stick as well, is you have to be growing yourself. Like, or as a leader, right? If you're not growing, like trying as hard as you possibly can to be a better leader, trying to absorb as many resources as possible. Like if you're not growing, you're not going to help anybody else grow either. So I feel like that's a caveat that I want to make sure is said. The question that you asked of your employee is almost verbatim how I ask it, right? If you were to first string like the very best version of yourself, I stole that verbiage from Larry Gelwix, but if you were to really first string like the very best effort that you could possibly muster over 30 days, what do you think you're capable of? And then normally as a follow-up is, why don't you think that you'd be capable of more? Or if it's like a really low goal, is why do you sell yourself short?
Mm-hmm.
If you have more belief, going back to like if you give more to your client than they expect, or if I can give an employee a higher sense of belief than they have in themselves, then again, they're going to stick. Like I'm going to empower them. I'm going to make them feel valued. I'm going to make them feel interesting.
With you asking that question of like, why do you think you can't do more? Or what makes you think you can't do more? Mm-hmm. Would you say it's fair that the question or the answers you typically get would be them self-identifying the character traits that limit them?
They're self-identifying on cognitive distortion. Like it's cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay. Like they're telling me their insecurities or limiting beliefs.
Okay, I like that, and then that allows you guys to resolve them together.
Yeah, well, even just the awareness piece. Like they're now aware of something that they may not have identified or put into words as to something that is limiting them.
Okay, cool. So then I want to go back to, and this is where, again, I think where I struggle the most. So I think that's great for I don't want to say mid-level players, but maybe like a middle of growth when it comes to production type trainer, right? So a trainer who's like trying to go from 15 sessions a week to 30 or up to full time. I think those conversation pieces are amazing. Mm-hmm. But let's say you get a trainer that is doing 40 hours a week, right? Sure. And they're doing it a year in. I guess I'm curious, what questions do you ask that gets them to continue to be, Well,
that follow-up would be like, why do you think that this is all there is? Like, why do you feel like you've peaked?
Okay, so like, why do you feel like production is all there is? Is that almost kind of the question that's being asked?
Or why do you feel like there's, because, production isn't the only way that you can grow. So why do you feel like you can't continue to grow? And what other areas could you grow that maybe you haven't been? That might be towards a personal goal. That might be towards...
So it doesn't need to be work related. It doesn't need to be career related.
No, like if they're set. I know we shared this example on our past podcast too. But if you have like a full-time employee, it might be something as simple as like they work for their family, but they don't track their finances or their net worth on a regular basis. Okay. Right? Let's track your growth for the next 6 months, at least once a month, and see if you don't feel more fulfilled. Would you be willing to give that a shot?
Fair enough.
And I'll check in with you every single week to make sure that we track it together.
Gotcha.
And I bet your professional fulfillment will go through the roof.
They'll feel better about the career in itself. I gotcha.
And they're not doing anything different. They're just like actually keeping track of another avenue of growth.
Okay.
So I'm holding up the mirror in a little bit of a different way.
I like that. And so, I do want to talk about something, and we kind of already briefly mentioned it and like noted it, but I want to continue to hear your opinion and almost move off of that track because I think that's important, probably the most important part as far as like creating trainer stick. But I do want to talk about, and this was somewhat anecdotal where, Ben and I were talking, and Ben's another one of our managers in our company who's very, very, very experienced and thorough and does an excellent job. And we were talking about, some of the top FMs in our company. And a big note that we had as far as like, if you looked at the FMs who had high production from new trainers, they're a little bit more boisterous or exciting with their personalities. It's not saying fun is the right word, but I do think it matters to a degree where they're a little bit more fun. Like they're a fun person to work with. How important do you think that is for creating stick for a trainer?
Early on, huge. Because it's like the initial sale, like it's the transfer of enthusiasm. Mm-hmm. So those that have more enthusiasm or choose to display more enthusiasm will be able to like transfer energy faster.
So it comes down to that like enthusiasm is uncool thing that we talk about. Like you don't want to be that kid in PE class who like doesn't try in PE because he's too cool to try.
It's like a relationship, right? Mm-hmm. Like it might be hot and heavy at the beginning, right? And that's what's required to like
get things started. Yeah.
But it's not what ends up like carrying a marriage through, let's say. There's the underlying purpose has to be there. Similar to what we talked about with the man's search for meaning and the French ambulance example that you shared.
I like that. So you think it's more as far as like creating a fun environment, right? So like, and I agree with you. It definitely matters probably the most in the beginning when the income's not present, because I know as trainers and all the fitness managers know this. When you start as a trainer, you really don't make any money. And most trainers don't become trainers to make money. So it kind of works out okay where in that initial, well, let's say 3 to 6 months, maybe even a year, their primary thing is enjoying the job in relation to like having fun and working with people and just enjoying that portion. Mm-hmm. So it's probably not just purely an energy thing. I guess what other things could you do as a manager to ensure that you're being quote unquote fun, if you will?
Personally,
I think it's probably never coming down on a trainer. I know it sounds weird, but I don't think you've ever came down on me as a trainer. I don't necessarily come down on my trainers. That's something that we agree is almost ineffective. Would you still say that?
Not publicly. So I think it's like parenting. Like I don't want to embarrass a new trainer publicly, especially as they're vulnerable and new, etc. Mm-hmm. If I have any dissatisfaction with their behaviors in alignment with their goals, we'll discuss that privately. Mm-hmm. And most of the time that isn't me coming down on them conversation. It's a me asking them.
What makes you feel like you need to do that?
Yes.
I've been asked this before.
I feel like that's more effective.
But that's the thing though, is so even in like a moment where, there's wrongdoing, if you will, like the trainer knew they shouldn't do what they were doing. They did it anyways.
Late.
Right. And I think we knee-jerk react, want to come down on them. Right. And I'm guilty of this too. I'm worse about it still. And did you ever suffer with that when you first got into management or leadership? Because you don't strike me as just because your personality type.
I think that this was something that was not necessarily solved for me prior to moving into a leadership role, but I feel like I've learned prior to like moving into a leadership role. Like from a young age, I always wanted to be a parent. And so like those were values that I wanted to foster in myself, like long before I actually had kids. Mm-hmm. So like as a parent, if I'm solely invested in your well-being, I'm going to put my emotions in the back seat because I care more about the whatever parenting guidance message I'm trying to get across. I'm concerned about them. And most of the time emotions, like where we get frustrated or we want to come down on a trainer, we want to put them in their place or we want to pull rank or whatever, is coming from a place where like we're thinking about ourselves and what we're not getting, right? Or how much of an inconvenience it is for us, as opposed to a sympathetic view where this person is struggling because
you stole my word.
Because they don't know better. Because I haven't taught them, so that's my fault, right? So if I have anybody to be pissed at, it's me, and I can express that separately.
My feet's millennial.
Kids taking his shoes off, that's okay. Throwing stuff.
Focus. No, that's good. I got you. So I threw you way off. I agree with you. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say that on a podcast. I was going to talk about my own personal family, but I won't do that. I will say, like, I don't believe in yelling at people in general. Like, I don't think I've ever yelled at somebody ever, probably, outside of maybe in like a competitive sport environment, but that's more fun. But definitely never I've never yelled at a partner of mine. Like that's never happened. I've never yelled at an employee, never yelled at a client. And I don't ever see an example where that would be useful or helpful at all. But I know, I mean, if every fitness manager in our company watched this podcast today, there's probably one on there that's yelled at an employee. Which, and I'm not saying that you're like a bad person or anything like that, right? I'm just saying I don't see the effectiveness of it, or even like cursing an employee, etc. But you did teach me this probably 2.5 years ago, I want to say. I remember I was in your office and I was like, Andy, how do you not get pissed off at some of these people? And when I first got hired, we had some trainers that I'm a fan of, like, on a personal level, but was not a fan of as far as like what they meant for the career, how they represented the career. And so I got to the point where I was disgruntled, and I was like, I don't like them. Not that I don't like them, but I don't like them being here. And I was like, I don't understand how you don't get frustrated and mad and like upset. And you told me that word, you used the word sympathy, and that was what I was going to talk about, where it's like, yeah, but I instead of being angry at them, I'm sympathetic. And I was like, what are you talking about? Why are you sympathetic? They have every opportunity in front of them to win. And he goes, yeah, but they don't know how, or they don't know why they should. Mm-hmm. And so I think for me, reframing any sort of anger I've had has served me so much in my life, even outside of work, where like my mom sometimes does some things I don't agree with. I don't get mad anymore. I really don't get mad at anybody. I just am sympathetic to the fact that they don't know better than what they're doing.
And I think that empowers you to be such a better leader, because you don't have to sift through like your own ego to do so. Like, I don't have to soothe my ego first by getting mad at them, which only serves me, it doesn't serve them, to get to the point where maybe I like pressured them into changing their behavior. I don't think that it's as permanent. I don't think it's as effective. And I feel like leaders resort to that far too often. Candidly, I think it's lazy, but like, leaders don't know any better. So this from the same thing, like, it's the sympathy expressed to the employee. Like, I express that sympathy towards other leaders that feel like they have to express their own personal emotions because they just don't know what else to do. Like, I don't know how to lead more effectively, so I'm just going to get mad, right? Mm-hmm. Like, what's required for me to like influence the situation and lead effectively is here, and my current ability is here, so I'm just going to get mad, right? And that's natural, but just don't take it out on the other person, right? Funnel that into urgency. And sometimes, like, candidly, the approach that we're talking about gets labeled as soft, right?
It gets labeled that way because, I think it's like, it's cool to be a hard ass.
For sure. And I know we've talked about that, but I think that it's so much more effective. Like, it's so much faster because I'm not wasting time.
You get into problem solve mode a lot quicker.
100%.
I mean, and if you're in a marriage, okay, and I think, like I said, we always go down to relationships, but if you're married to somebody, you're married to them because you love them, you fell in love with them, you want to have a great relationship with them. And so the faster you can get to fixing the problem that you guys are having, the more effective you're going to be for continuing your marriage, right? Versus yelling at them. Yelling at your wife sounds crazy to me because like, you can't leave, you can't exit, you have to be with them. And I think if we view our relationship with our trainers that same way, where it's like, I can't get rid of this person. Like, they're my person. I have to see them every day.
Yeah.
Now I don't want to yell at them because then tomorrow I got to see them again. And that's an awkward situation to be in. I think it's important to remember that. I think it's also important to note that this is a like developed skill. And so like, for me personally, like, I'm a little insecure when I talk to Andy about something like this because he's dramatically better than I am about this. Like, I know I still have my like weak points where I get frustrated and I say something that serves me rather than, asking questions to help them or getting us to like a better spot. And I'll tell you, over this past year, I've learned a lot about this. I've been avoidant of these conversations, knowing I wasn't good at them. And knowing that I got emotionally charged and that sometimes I said what I shouldn't. And so if this is like something you're trying to work on as a manager, or you're like, dang, I get hot sometimes and I say what I shouldn't say. And I think that's where you're going to lose top producers. I hate to say it, but you almost have to just bite the learning curve. And you have to put yourself in those situations and do your best to identify when you're elevating and try to bring yourself back down. But if you avoid it, I don't think you ever get any better at it. But I've progressed a lot further, probably in the last 3 to 6 months, because I've been diving into these conversations more and continued to practice that skill of, keeping myself down and having a more effective, appropriate conversation with somebody, despite how much they might be frustrating me.
For sure. Like, kind of a hack that I would use early on in my coaching career is I always keep notes as I'm having conversations with people. And up at the top, I would normally put their name. And if you guys see my coaching notes, you've probably seen them, their name ends up being circled like 100 times. It's more so like a reminder of who am I focusing on in this conversation. Am I focusing on what I'm going to respond and what I'm going to say? Am I going to try to impress this person, or am I trying to deliver value to them? John Maxwell opens every single speech with, my goal today is to add value to you, where the focus is on them. And if the focus is on them, it takes all the pressure off yourself. You can take yourself out of your own way, so to speak.
I like that a lot. I think the note taking in itself is super, super useful. So if you're working on having this, because if you're working with top producers, you're gonna run into problems, and you're gonna have to have one-on-one meetings. Taking notes is huge. And for me personally, I know like if I'm in a one-on-one with somebody and I'm taking notes on stuff they say, usually the things that I would say aggravate me the most are the things I write down, which isn't as like a gotcha to keep it, but me writing it down, I think one allows me to know what they truly feel, right? Because I think that's probably the truest version of what they're thinking at the time. But in addition, it allows me to read it. So like not only did I just hear it, but now I wrote it and now I'm reading it as I'm writing it. And that allows me to hear it like 2 or 3 times and bring myself back down to really understand what they're saying when they say what they're saying versus knee-jerk responding, And I think so taking notes and writing will help develop this as a skill for you because it just slows you down a little bit.
Far too often, I mean, as leaders, we don't dictate our focus. We allow it to be dictated to us, and then we don't like entertain that thought before accepting it as true. Another Viktor Frankl quote. And then using what we talked about in the previous podcast, Tony Robbins saying, where what you focus on determines what you feel, which determines what you do. And oftentimes people don't take control of their focus, right? So they stay focused on themselves, what they're not getting, and then how are they going to feel? They're going to feel frustrated. They're going to feel inadequate. They're going to feel embarrassed. They're going to feel all the negative things. And then how are their actions going to look? Terrible. But if our focus is instead on the other person, okay, not on ourselves, then that's going to drastically change how we feel, which is going to drastically change the actions that we put forward. That's going to drastically change our behaviors and our ability to drive value to somebody else. Ultimately helping them stick, because if people feel like they're the center of your focus and your time, and these meetings aren't just to serve you as the manager, they're to actually serve and deliver value to them, they're not going to leave.
Yeah, this is good. This is great for me because this is actually like moving into this next year. This has been my number one goal. And it's why like on my whiteboard at home, I have my trainer's incomes on the whiteboard. And that's cool and all, and it's numerical and great. But my big overarching goal and why I'm measuring that number and keeping it as a focus for me isn't as much about the number, but it's my goal for this next year was to love my trainers more, which I sound somewhat vague, which is why I got it down to having some actual numbers and some goals for them. But I truly believe if you want your trainers to stick, you need to care more about them than you care almost to a degree about yourself. And I think that's really what love is to some degree, is like their goals are more important to me than my own goals. I think it's really funny. Last night, we had our Christmas party last night. So I had all my training staff over, and I think almost 5 of them, which is a lot of them, asked me like, where's yours at? They're like, Tiger, where's your income goal? I was like, I don't have one this year. They're like, what? I'm like, I had one last year. I don't want one this year. Like my goal is for you guys to hit your goals this year. I don't care about my income. And I think that is going to serve me dramatically better towards my income. And it's going to serve them dramatically better too, because my number one focus is making sure they win.
For sure.
And weirdly enough, I feel so much better about my job because of it. Honestly, I feel really good. I'm super excited for this next year because I'm like, I cannot wait to just see them hit goals and be excited and be happy and go through that same thing I got to go through as a trainer. And we'll see where my income lands up this next year. But it's truly not a focal point, which is, super, super exciting.
Yeah. Servant leaders will keep followers significantly longer because they feel valued. I think that's super important. And for any of you guys out there as leaders, the most important goal you can have is the success of your team. And I know we shared that in the past as well. Like that was always my goal every year, was the aggregate of all of my trainers' goals. I love that you're doing that as well. And when people believe that, they want to see you win too. So they're going to try harder. Well, if my success is this person's success, then I wouldn't go after those goals for myself, but I'll go after them for him because he invests in me. Yeah.
And I think for me, like personally, right, this was kind of like a change of thought for me. Because one of my big personal goals as just a human in general is to change, I guess, the perception of what it means to be a trainer, or change how people view that. And I want everybody to view being a trainer as like a amazing job. Like you're a doctor. I want that to be comparative. And my staff knows this super, super well. And I thought for a long time that would matter to them. Like, oh, this is what he wants, is he wants us all to be, trainers or career trainers and stuff.
Sure.
And I think for some, it maybe did buy some stock, but I don't think it bought nearly as much as me not even talking about that being my goal. But rather than making trainers get more credit, I want you specifically, your name, to have a career here. And I think individualizing it to them specifically and making sure that they know they're the focus rather than this big goal is my focus. I'm focusing on them. I think that's going to end up I'm going to get closer to my overarching goal if I have that as my focus.
So we chatted about that before. So I think to bring that together, like as a leader, you need to have vision that's big enough for your team to like buy into. They're like, yes, that's something that's compelling enough to follow. But then you also need to value your team. So you need to have vision, and you need to value your team.
Value your team at the individual level. Yeah.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think we kind of covered it all.
Yep. I mean, you do those things, you'll definitely be keeping more clients and more trainers, and it's a scary combination. When a team doesn't lose trainers, they don't lose clients. Even if they're not the strongest on new business or client acquisition, they grow, and they excel. So hopefully it was valuable to you guys today as you look forward towards your initiatives for 2025. It's something that we're super confident and passionate about is how can we grow and become better leaders and help more people stay in this career, in this profession that we've found so valuable for years. We know how impactful it can be, and it can only be done by helping people mature in this industry for the long haul, continually delivering great value to people. So hopefully you guys, again, like I said, saw some value from today. Look forward to tune in next time, and we'll see you guys soon.
And ask out if you have questions. Ask us if you have questions. Reach out if you have questions. Got there. Here we go. We're good. All right.
Perfect. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Those were good. That was another hour.